one of the most obvious ones is the so-called PGT-A. We used to call it PGS. Now, we were the first, really, in the United States to do preimplantation genetic testing in 1994 for cystic fibrosis. It was published in the Journal of American Medical Association. If you have a single gene defect that you are carriers of, it's very, very accurate to do PGD and make sure that the baby doesn't have that particular defect. And so diseases like muscular dystrophy or Tay-Sachs or Huntington's or sickle cell, and there are 10,000 of these very rare single gene genetic diseases. It's very, very accurate. Do the embryo biopsy, and you can very accurately make sure not to transfer a diseased embryo. But then what became popular, and we tried it too, we studied it and found it reduced the success rate, and that was first published in Amsterdam by Mastenbroek and his colleagues, and we were part of that. But if you can, the idea is patients are told we'll do genetic testing to make sure the baby's going to be normal. And that's not really what's happening, because there's 23,000 genes, which represent only 2% of the genome. And the other 98% are DNA sequences that are most likely involved in regulation of gene dosage and impact. And so you can't really study all of that from a single biopsy from an embryo. We don't understand it well enough. All we can do is count chromosomes, and that's aneuploidy versus euploidy. And if we count the chromosomes, which we can do on individual cells, the problem is that the early embryo has a variety of euploid and aneuploid cells. And the euploid cells will outgrow the aneuploid cells if we have a baby, or the aneuploid cells will outgrow the euploid cells if we have a miscarriage or no pregnancy. And it would be great if this could be accurate, but it doesn't work. The science directly looking at single cells in embryos and stem cells developed from those blastocysts that were diagnosed show that you think it's aneuploid, but it's really euploid. 40% error rate at least. And furthermore, now we've had 4 controlled studies that demonstrate, the most recent one coming from Duke, but before that, it came from the very pioneer of aneuploid screening, Santiago Monet from Cooper Labs. And they're controlled randomized studies, which had to be carefully done to try to get FDA approval. Their controlled randomized studies showed that the unbiopsied embryo that we had no idea what it was had the same pregnancy rate as the biopsy one that was diagnosed as normal. But since the abnormal, quote, abnormal ones were thrown away, that means you lowered your pregnancy rate because you were throwing away half of the embryos that could have been babies. And there was no improvement in baby rate, implantation rate, pregnancy rate, no improvement if you transferred an embryo that was diagnosed as normal euploid versus an embryo that never had a biopsy. And so that was, and I remember I asked Dr. Monet at a meeting, well, how could that be? You've been promoting this for many, many years, and now it looks like it's of no use. And he said, well, now that Cooper bought us, we're not allowed to massage the statistics. And so, in other words, statistics are being massaged, and it really is of no use. And I wish it was, because we did it in the early days in the 90s, hoping that it would work, but we found out that it didn't work. And now we figured out why from studies beginning as early as 2010 by Nisham et al. That showed that the early embryo has a variety of aneuploid and euploid cells, so biopsying doesn't help you in diagnosing aneuploidy. So PGT-A is one of the major ones, but there are other add-ons. The endometrial reception assay, a study that just came out about 3 months ago in fertility and sterility, a control study showed that it did not improve the pregnancy rate or the endometrial receptivity. And yet it's a very costly test. And it sounds really good because it involves molecular biology and genetics, but it doesn't do a thing. It doesn't work. And that's another add-on. Embryo glue to try to get the embryos to stick to the uterine lining. Well, that's ridiculous, because if the embryos are normal, they're going to naturally invade the uterine lining, and gluing them together, making them stick, doesn't work. There's all kinds of hormonal add-ons, putting people on growth hormone and DHEA, and all kinds of nutritional supplements, CoQ10, and they don't really help at all. In fact, DHEA hurts because it's a male hormone. And control studies that were first, actually, it was almost 4 years or 5 years ago in Helsinki at the European Society of Human Reproduction, control studies showed that it didn't help, it only hurt the success rate. So there's a lot of myths that go around because you're trying everything to see if you can improve success rates without any real scientific evaluation. But when there is a scientific evaluation, it's disregarded by these commercialized IVF centers that are owned by private equity because they don't want to lose their chance to have an extra fee and generate more profit. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. I hope it's okay. I can go into more detail if you like.